Talk loudly, please.
Okay, I'll do a quick introduction. And Carrie, you can go ahead and share your screen with your presentation.
Oh, okay, I can pull it up on my computer then. I wasn't sure if it was going to be used on the box or not.
If you just share your screen and pull it up to your desktop,
okay.
Control, okay? And so the next speaker, okay, is Dr. Carrie Williams. She is Extension Horse Specialist out at Rutgers. I've heard her talk about this before, and actually we've had her on our updates in the past because she's a very applied, excellent equine nutritionist. And so she's going to do a presentation that's titled Human and Fad Diets and Their Effects on Horse Nutrition and all. And I think you'll find Carrie very well versed on all of these kinds of things. And so with that, as soon as she gets things up, I'm just going to let her go ahead and go with it.
All right. So everybody's seen it? Okay, I hit share and this is my presentation up. So
okay.
Just let me know if it's visible.
Yeah, it's kind of up here. It's fine. Now we can see your first and your next slide, but that's fine. You can go with it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's the presentation view. Let me see if I can get rid of that because I've got two monitors. So.
Oh, okay.
That wasn't what I wanted. Hide presenter view. Sorry, it's just showing the wrong monitor for some reason.
Should be able to just hit slideshow, I think.
Yeah, I did, and my slideshow always comes up as presenter view, so I'm just trying to get it to stop doing presenter view. Oh, there we go. I just had to hit no presenter view. All right, let me try that again. All right. Are you seeing anything or no?
We're still seeing, maybe go over the side and just click on from the beginning. When you go down below, it's still.
Yeah, because on my computers, my slideshow is showing up on my right-handed screen.
Yes. We're seeing exactly what you're seeing.
Yeah, but on what screen, though? I've got two monitors.
The one with the stuff going down the side plus the big one. So it's not the actual slideshow.
And I have it on slideshow. It's just my slideshow is coming up on my other monitor. That's the problem.
You can go back to share screen in the deal, and you can tell it which monitor to see, which screen to see.
Okay. Share screen. So which, where would that show up at? More.
Usually you can see a couple of different ones.
Optimize full screen settings, disable, hide panel.
I can usually see a couple different ones and I click on it. Mine will say right or left.
Yeah, I'm not having any of those. Well, you know what? We can just do it without it so I don't take up more time.
Yeah, we can just go from there. That's fine.
Yeah, we'll just do it here. Sorry about that. I'm not familiar with Zoom, and like I said, it's a little new to me. All right. Well, hello, everybody. Sorry about that little technical difficulty, but as Dr. Anderson said, I'm Carrie Williams. I'm on the East Coast at Rutgers University in New Jersey, and my talk today is on human diet fads and how they have their effect on horse nutrition. So what we are going to start with is just a snippet of 5 or 6 different things that have come up in my 15 years or 14 years of being here at Rutgers, both from horse owners, from different public supplement companies, feed companies that I've worked with, and just various things that have come up throughout the last couple of years. So the first one I would like to start with is the famous no carb diet, which is probably the first one I ended up hearing when I was at Rutgers. And hopefully many of you out there are starting to think, well, I don't really know that that's possible if there's a no-carb diet for horses, because you would be correct. So over the last few years, a lot of the questions have turned to low-carb diet instead of no-carb diet. So that's this low carb here. Because our forages and our fibers are carbohydrates. So obviously the majority of their diet is forage. And then you have the grains or the starch. So some people might mean no starch diets or low starch, or even now so more of the restricted starch diets, which mean no molasses, no corn, or low corn in the diet. Sometimes you'll hear it less corn. That just means no corn. And it's replacing these grains with other high fiber ingredients. So before I really get into the whole carbohydrate conundrum, I just want to give a little bit of information on the dietary carbohydrates and break it down so that everybody's on the same page. So when we're talking about starch here, that's an enzymatic breakdown of a long string of glucoses. So starch is just a bunch of different glucoses all pushed together. So they can be broken down very, very easily, and that happens in the small intestine. And then we have ethanol-soluble carbohydrates, and these are easily termed just sugars. There are glucoses, our fructoses, our sucroses, etc., and they're all extracted by an 80% ethanol solution. And then we have fructans. Fructans are similar, but it is similar to starch, but a chain of fructoses. So it's simple sugars that are enzymatically cleaved, and they're not necessarily able to be taken care of completely in the small intestine, so some will be taken care of also in the large intestine. And then we have water-soluble carbohydrates, and this is just combining your ESC plus your fructans, and then your NSC, which is your starch plus your water-soluble carbohydrates. And this is the terminology that a lot of people I think are most familiar with, because it's what a lot of the feed companies use. NSC, non-structural carbohydrates, or starch plus your sugars plus your fructans. So most low sugar, low starch diets, are appropriate only for some horses. And I'm going to give a couple examples where some horses it might be necessary, and in other cases where it might not. So for example, this metabolically challenged horse, or the horse with equine metabolic syndrome, or EMS. Some of these conditions will include insulin resistance, hyperinsulinemia, Cushing's, etc. So in this case, some of you might have one of these horses, and if you have, you probably have had your vet test them for their glucose and insulin using a oral glucose tolerance test or a dexamethasone suppression test, ACTH test, anything along those lines. And these should all be done before taking really drastic measures like adding drugs or things like that to the horse's routine. So if the horse needs some sort of low carbohydrate diet, but doesn't necessarily need a weight gain diet, the best way to do that is usually just to provide them with a good forage diet. If you can feed enough forage, like 2 to 2.5% of their body weight, so 20 to 25 pounds of forage, that's really usually pretty low. Granted, we'll talk a little bit about haze and stuff, but not really. If you really want to know exactly how much sugars or starches are in the hay, you really need to get them tested, because there's no way to visually observe or guess at how much is in there. But typically, most of the hays are going to be somewhere around 10 to 15%, and kind of that target level should be about 10% of the diet. If you have horses with insulin resistance, without obesity, this is the way to do it. But if you need, if you need to manage their weight. If they are starting to lose weight, they need a little bit of supplement. They might need a little bit of grain. Add in some fat supplements to the diet is the best way to do it because it won't significantly affect their insulin sensitivity at all. So some of these fat supplements can be added to about 20% of the diet, which is actually quite high if you're thinking of adding that much in terms of corn or corn oil, or an oil, or rice bran, something like that. So some other times where some horses might actually need a low starch or restricted starch diet, or horses, competition horses that have chronic tying up or reoccurrent exertional rhabdomyolysis. These horses, there's been a lot of studies done that have proved that the best way to manage these horses is on low sugar, low starch diets. So they're actually specifically formulated diets to use a very high level of fat that is used for their energy sources instead of the soluble carbohydrates. They also use a mixture of what's called rapidly fermentable carbohydrates, and some of these are things like beet pulp. But as I really want to point out, because I don't want to make everybody think that all horses should have low starch diets, really not all horses need low starch diets. There are that intensely exercising horses, competition horses that really should have soluble carbohydrates. They actually need a lot of their calories to come from these soluble carbohydrates. So starch in their diet is actually not a bad word. They need it to help replenish the muscle glycogen that they're using on a daily basis for their training. And because horses do lack a gallbladder, they actually can't consume enough fat to completely sustain their energy level through exercise, especially at the peak of their level of training. So what about this non-equine metabolic syndrome horse that typically tends to get hot, like this little picture down here in the corner, on high NSC or non-structural carbohydrate diets? So anything that might contain some corn or have a lot of starch, it's really rapidly broken down and used for energy. And that's where we tend to get that impression of a hot horse, or that is why corn is considered a hot feed. It's just not because of the temperature that it produces, but in terms of the energy level that it produces. So some horses are actually more sensitive to this excessive energy than others. It'll manifest in bucking, kicking, spooking, or just being generally more excitable. So in this case, you'd probably want to treat them more like the metabolic syndrome horse. Look for some of these low starch diets, things that have a higher level of fat or a higher level of these rapidly fermentable carbohydrates, like the beet pulp, even soy hulls, things like that, along with the fat, are really good for these types of horses. So I'm moving right along into my second diet fad, and that really comes from, the human supplement market, because a lot of human dietitians and just humans that look, at their diets, they want that magic pill, they want that magic supplement, and if receiving a well-balanced diet, really horses shouldn't need anything extra. And I say shouldn't because there are some cases that I'm going to go through when a supplement might actually be necessary. And some of these are things like exertional rhabdomyolysis, which I just mentioned, horses that tie up frequently. Vitamin E has actually been proven to be a supplement that could potentially be necessary. Because in a lot of these horses, vitamin E is found in low levels in their systems, and vitamin E is also found in very low levels in hay. So if you pick a supplement that has between 2,500 and 5,000 IU per day, it can reduce the level of muscle membrane leakage of the enzymes like creatine kinase and the aspartate aminotransferase that leak out into the system during times like this. But you do want to make sure that it's a pure vitamin E supplement, because if they are combined with selenium and you start adding 2, 3, 4 scoops, you could get to that upper limit of selenium in the diet. And really, does synthetic or natural matter? In all the research that I've done in past years, we've used the synthetic form versus the natural form just depends on how much you want to pay and how much you want to use. I mean, yeah, the natural form is, absorbed about twice as well, but usually you're feeding half as much. So, in terms of dollars and cents, they seem to work out about the same. So what about electrolytes? I've heard a lot of people say, well, it's getting to be really warm out and it's starting to be summer, so I'm going to feed my horses electrolytes every day. And then I ask them, well, are you really working really intensely every day? Like some horses might. Some of the, either combined or eventing horses or race horses or something might actually train really hard once a day. But, for the most part, most of them aren't. So really, horses only need electrolytes when they're sweating. So again, if they sweat every day, fine. But if you give daily supplementation of the electrolytes and they don't need it or they're not losing them, you're actually going to do more harm than good because you're going to throw off this natural balance. Things like your sodium, chloride, potassium, magnesium, calcium, etc. are some of these electrolytes. Now, if you are going to go to the store and buy an electrolyte, keep in mind they're not all created equal. So it's good to be an educated buyer, read your labels, think about what you're buying. Our electrolytes are not the same as our horses, so we drink Gatorade to replenish our electrolytes. It's not going to work in horses because that number one ingredient is glucose, sucrose, fructose, one of the sugars. If it has a sugar as the first ingredient for our horses, it's not going to do a thing. Really, our horses need salt or sodium chloride as the number one ingredient. Because if you look at this horse down in the corner, you can see all of the white sweat. That's called lather in the sweat. They also have very high protein in their sweat. It's a protein called latherin, and that's what makes them get lathered up. But they have a much more concentrated sweat than we do. Joint supplements, they tend to be a big one. I'm not going to say that it's necessary for horses, but there has been studies that have shown if horses do actually have a osteoarthritis, then it could potentially be good. Some of the glucosamine, chondroitin sulfate, there's a lot of other products, the avocado, saponifiables or ASU, vitamin C, magnesium, yucca, etc., hyaluronic acid. Some of these products do work in some of the horses that have been shown to have a problem. However, really important to note, some horses are what's called non-responders. And these non-responders, it means that they might have these conditions, but they're not going to respond to some of the supplements that other horses will. So, give it a month or two, buy a supplement. If you don't feel it works, if there's no physical evidence of it working, don't waste your money. So what about hoof supplements? I hear people say they've tried them and they don't work. And then my question to them is usually, well, do you know the underlying reason for why your horses have bad hooves, like this hoof down in the corner? So is there a reason why that hoof looks like that? Is it environmental or is it diet? If it's environmental, there's nothing you can do to the diet that's going to make it help. But if there is something in the diet that's missing, then some of these hoof supplements might be good. Biotin has actually been proven to be one of the things that's needed for the production of keratin. And hoof supplements should have about 20 milligrams per day. Iodine also at about 1 milligram per day. It's essential for the thyroid hormones, which actually help develop all the tissues. Methionine, while they don't necessarily know the level, it is responsible for a lot of keratin production in the hoof, so it's usually in some of the hoof supplements. And then zinc. Zinc at about 175 to 250 milligrams per day also contributes to hoof health. So if it could be a dietary issue as to why the hoof is poor, some of these supplements could help. But you have to ask yourself, how long does it take for the hoof to grow from the coronary band all the way down? It's about 8 months to maybe even a year if the hoof grows very slow. So you're going to need to leave these horses on these supplements for about a year in order to see any effects. So there's a lot of other supplements out there, and I'm not going to go through all of them because a lot of them really haven't had the research done on them to show whether they're effective or not. Things like calming aids or digestive products, immune stimulators, co-conditioners, muscle builders, you name it. There's just a bunch of pictures I pulled offline down below. I'm not saying that they don't work, but there's just not a whole lot of research done on a lot of these. So if you're going to try it, use it for several months, but if you don't feel it's working, my recommendation to you is don't waste your money. But speaking of supplements, I know omega-3 fatty acids is a really popular supplement out there now, and when adding fat to the diet, we always want to stress, add the omega-3s and not the omega-6s, because, omega-6s are going to be detrimental. They're going to cause inflammation. It's going to be really bad, just like it is for humans. So humans have translated that from their own diets, and our human recommendation of, an omega-6 to omega-3 ratio of 10-to-1, therefore, is what our horses need. Well, I'm going to take the next couple of slides and I'm going to explain to you why this might not be as much of an issue for our horses as it is for us. So in horses, there really are no bad fatty acids. So horses do require a dietary source of both the linoleic, which is omega-6, and the alpha-linolenic, which is our omega-3s. Because they lack the dietary enzymes, or the enzymes in their system, to help them synthesize some of these fatty acids. So really, any oil you use can be oxidized for energy and incorporated into the cell membranes. Really, that's why we're feeding the fatty acids. However, I know there are some oils that are considered better than others. So let's take, for instance, corn oil and vegetable oils. Okay, yeah, they're high in omega-6s. So yeah, they possibly can contribute to an increase in inflammation and possibly reduce cellular immunity. I know a lot of these studies have been done in humans. Not as many of these studies have been done in horses to show whether or not the omega-6s really are detrimental. So with humans, yes, eating fish is healthy because it's high in omega-3s, but that's also true for flaxseed or linseed, and these are things that we feed our horses. But here's the important kicker here. What a lot of horse people don't realize is that pasture grasses actually have a similar ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 as flaxseed. I'll let that sit for a little bit. So if you take the amount of omega-3 fatty acids in 2 to 3 cups of flaxseed, it actually equals the same amount of omega-3 fatty acids in 22 pounds of grass hay. And that should be the amount of hay fed to, say, a maintenance horse that needs 100% of its diet coming from hay. That's about what they'd be getting. So it's equal there. So forage-only diets and their omega-6 to omega-3 ratio is about 0.3 to 0.6 to 1. If you're going to add a concentrate in there because they're exercising or they need some high-fat concentrate, usually that fat comes from either rice bran or an oil, then your ratio is about an 8-to-1 ratio. That's omega-6 to omega-3. So I just mentioned that the recommendations in humans is a 10-to-1 or less than 10-to-1, but really there's nothing that's been shown or proven in what the recommended levels of omega-6 to omega-3 is in horses. So we really have no idea. And that's because there's so much conflicting research out there. Does it really cause inflammation if you have too high of omega-6s? What about the different oils to insulin-resistant horses? Some people think that the omega-6s is going to really cause a lot higher level of insulin resistance. There's really been no solid research on that. Enhance cellular immunity, etc. There really isn't anything definitive. So what are my recommendations then as a nutritionist? Horses on a poor quality forage diet. So ones that might need a little bit more energy to maintain its weight but aren't really getting it from their forage. They might need a fat supplement to last them through the winter or to help with their exercise training. You might want to then consider feeding them a flaxseed, which is a 0.26 to 1, or a fish oil, which is a 0.13 to 1. So then it might be a good idea. However, if you have horses that are on pasture or that are on a really good quality forage and already have a low ratio of omega-6 to omega-3, then spending a lot of money on some of these high omega-3 supplements might not be worth it. And you might just want to consider going with a rice bran at 19-1 or a soybean at 7-1 versus a corn oil at 53-1. Or, again, if they're on high pasture levels, it just might not matter. So I am going to give fad number 4 one slide. And we're going to go through it pretty quickly because I can talk for 2 hours on this subject about holistic remedies. So many people now are getting the herbal supplements here and there, and they're really doing a lot of holistic diets. So if you translate them to horses, there are a few concerns. And the first concern is that some parts of these herbal plants or these herbal products are actually toxic to horses. Take things like horsetail. Horsetail is toxic. It causes weight loss, diarrhea, some nervous conditions, and even lack of coordination. So if it were me, I wouldn't want horsetail in any product I'm feeding my horses. Some have a negative interaction with other dietary products and medications, so it's really important to consult with your veterinarian when your horse is on both an herbal product and some medications. Now, some of these substances are actually on the banned substance list for some show organizations or racing circuits. So you really want to check with whatever your show circuit is if you are showing, especially things like valerian or valerian root. Here's the picture of it here. It's typically in a lot of calming supplements, and it is very effective. They've actually shown that it has the same or similar benefits or detriments, however you want to look at it, as phenobarbital in some situations. So really pretty effective there. And first and foremost, I think research should be done on horses and not on humans and lab animals. And there's really very few horse research projects that have been done. There is some on echinacea, there's one on garlic, and a lot of them are just kind of polyherbal products that were paid for by companies to test their product. So there's really not a whole lot out there. I did produce an article that gave a summary of a lot of this. That was in 2008 in the Veterinary Journal. If anyone is interested, you can email me and I'll send you that full journal article about some of the herbal products in horses. Kind of along the same line, but I'm going to spend a little bit more time here on natural diets. So humans like, the whole grain, homemade, muesli mixes, no processing, very whole food diets. So now, if you're going to do this for your horses, there are some benefits. If you have one of these horses that does seem to have a lot of allergic reactions, you can do more elimination diets, and you can figure out exactly what they're allergic to. You can feed all one grain, or you can take out and feed all one hay, and you can really find out what they might be allergic to. It also might be more economical if you are feeding a lot of horses in bulk. If you only have 2, 3, or even 4 horses, it just might not be economical enough. But if you have large barns and you can get a bulk mix, this might be the way to go. However, there are so many complex considerations that go behind balancing a diet. There are so many different interactions with all of the minerals and the vitamins, and you really need a paid nutritionist to really balance your diet. So it can get kind of complicated. However, I am going to go through the next couple slides where some processing may or may not be necessary in some of these whole grain diets. So first I want to say that really the true way to do an all-natural diet, and you can see the theme here in my talk, is just go with a high-quality forage. I'm such a good proponent of forage. High-quality forage fed at 2 to 2.5% of the body weight for those horses that are easy keepers should be all that's necessary, especially in terms of pasture. However, if the horse is exercising or a hard keeper, it might be necessary to feed some extra calories. And if you truly want an unprocessed grain to go in the diet, oats is the way to go. So when we're talking about oats, it's the most common cereal grain fed to horses. Processing does not increase digestibility. Some people think it does because they see oats in the feces. Well, it's not the actual oats, it's the hull of the oats. And yes, oat hulls does have some indigestibility. And I say some, it's not a whole lot, but it's just the really plant component, the plant cell wall of the grain. It's higher in fiber than most grains and lower in sugar and starches, so it really has a nice profile for horses. If some can't eat oats, then barley is actually shown to be a good grain for horses. It's a little higher in starch and a little lower in fiber than oats, but it is much less than corn. However, it does require some sort of processing. The shell around the barley is really, really tough, and if it's fed, it is going to come right out the other end. So the horses can't properly digest it unless it's cracked or rolled or crimped or something. If your horse needs a higher level of protein in the diet, the best all-natural way to go is alfalfa. I particularly like alfalfa, at least when it's mixed. Say you feed some extra alfalfa cubes. If a horse isn't crazy about its grass hay, it provides extra protein and extra calcium. Really good for brood mares, foals, lactating mares as well. Now, soybean meal is also really high in protein, but does need to be processed. The meal needs to be stripped off of the grain because the whole soybeans actually contain a trypsin inhibitor that negates their protein value. So they should at least be soaked if they're going to be cooked, but they could also be ground or, like I said, made into a meal where the soybean meal is stripped off of the grain. So what about some other high-fat ingredients? I've mentioned rice bran a few times. That's a really good one. That's actually my favorite one. It's very palatable. It's also really high in fiber. And it can actually help with some nice weight gain without having this high NSC diet component to it. So for the metabolic syndrome horse, it'd be a nice way to add some calories. 1,000-pound horse can get about a pound or two a day of rice bran. However, again, it needs to be processed somehow because the bran is just inside the hull of a rice hull, so it needs to be stripped off. It also needs to be what's called stabilized. Now, regular bran, wheat bran included, has very low levels of calcium. It's actually really high in phosphorus, so it's going to disrupt that 2-to-1 calcium to phosphorus ratio that horses need. So it needs to be stabilized. We add calcium to the rice bran. You also strip it from the shell. Unless, of course, you're feeding complete and total diet of a lot of alfalfa, then your calcium is fine. But not many people are feeding enough to really balance the diet that way. What else? Flax seeds I mentioned already. The raw seeds do contain a cyanogenic glycoside. Okay, that doesn't sound good, does it? Well, the good news is when the seeds go through the digestive system of the horse, the enzymes are actually going to inactivate the enzymes that are needed to release the cyanide. So feeding whole soybean or whole flax seeds is not an issue because our horses have gastric acid that basically denatures these enzymes, so it's fine. Just the problem is if you are going to boil your flax seeds, it's okay, but don't soak them in water because any water, any moistening without the gastric acid is going to release the cyanide. So if you are going to use some ground flaxseed, really be careful of its shelf life. I wouldn't have it on your shelf for more than probably 2 weeks because it is so high in fat it can go rancid. Unless, of course, you're keeping it in the refrigerator, that'll help as well. Raw nuts have a lot of the same problems, so I get asked a lot. People around the holidays, they start making treats for their horses and they want to use nuts. It's not a good idea because it's really similar to the raw soybeans. They shouldn't be fed in large quantities because they do also contain a toxin. What about garlic? Garlic is all natural, right? So it's believed to be an insecticide or a fly repellent. Also has some anti-inflammatory properties. So a lot of people are feeding that to their horses. Well, high doses, so like garlic extracts, have been discovered to cause Heinz body anemia in horses. So what that means is it actually deforms the red blood cells, so it decreases the oxygen carrying capacity. So if it gets severe enough, horses are going to have problems problems breathing. And actually suffocation could be the end result if very severe. So horses that might be fed around 10 grams per day should be okay, but there's really not a whole lot known about the long-term effects or even the effectiveness of the garlic as an insect control. Salt. I do want to cover salt quickly. It should be added to every ration. Horse feed ingredients are all deficient in sodium chloride, so leave them a block. Put some loose salt on top of their feed or just leave it loose in a pan. They will regulate their salt intake. However, I've not seen any research that's been done in horses to show that any of these fancy salts like the Himalayan salt block or any of that is absorbed any differently in terms of its sodium chloride than just a regular old white salt block. So I know I didn't get too much into balancing of rations, but just kind of my take-home message here with this one is that, you know, the balancing rations is very complicated with all the vitamins and minerals that go into it. So that's why a lot of people just pay for the well-researched formulations in commercial horse feed instead of balancing their own or making their own whole grain diets. Kind of in closing, I have my last fad, number 6, GMO versus non-GMO feeds. So let's start at the beginning and just get everybody on the same page as to what GMO or genetically modified organism is. Typically here we're talking about corn and soybeans. These are the two genetically modified plants that do make up a large portion of the horse feeds. And these two have been classified as GMO since '97. In 2011, USDA's also approved alfalfa as a GMO product. So now GMO, what does it mean? It means the DNA in that plant has been altered in some way. So it'll make these plants resist things like insects or herbicides or viruses, etc. So farmers use these plants because they want a higher yield. They want healthier plants, and it therefore gives them higher profits. So for example, let's take alfalfa. Before it was grown, it would have, before it was grown without the introduction of weeds, because now we can make it have no weeds in the fields, there would be a weed called fiddleneck, which would actually grow in the alfalfa and could sometimes be baled in the alfalfa. Now, fiddleneck in horses can cause chronic liver failure and possible death. So now there's no fiddleneck in some of these fields because the alfalfa is able to use the chemical herbicides to kill the weeds but yet not kill the alfalfa. So they're really making actually a much healthier alfalfa plant. Now, I know the public is really concerned about feeding the GMO to livestock, particularly like beef, poultry, pork, because therefore it could potentially have a carryover in the dairy or the meat products that we eat. Well, with horses, since we don't eat them, I think it's purely more of a health concern, similar to what it is for us. You know, we say, oh, I don't want GMO because I'm not sure what it's going to do. Well, it's the same with horses. Now, really the question becomes, has this really been validated in horses? Well, so far there's been no research that has actually shown that any of these feeds are dangerous if the GMO are consumed by the horses or even the livestock. Now, I'm not going to argue with or against any of these plants or, you know, the use of GMOs, but here are some other facts. It is virtually impossible to guarantee that a crop is totally non-GMO. Pollen from nearby GMO crops can actually spread miles across to other organic or non-GMO crop fields. So therefore, it negates that. Some horse feed companies have actually started producing non-GMO feeds. There are some out there. They're very expensive, and they're not able to be completely organic. So it seems right now that with horse feeds, it's either one or the other. You can either get a non-GMO or get an organic, but they can't get them both right now. So a lot of the problems include the cost. Again, like I mentioned, it's really high and sometimes cost prohibitive. And again, they can't get it to be totally organic. Some GMO feeds have no significant differences in safety. So they've done a lot of safety, digestibility, nutritional value testing in the horse feed markets to see if there's any differences. And right now there hasn't been. There have also been no residual recombinant DNA found in some of these animals that that have been fed the GMO products. And really none of this research has been done in horses. It's all been carried over from cattle, pigs, etc. So let me just summarize all 6 of my fads really quickly. Not all horses need low-carb diets or low-starch diets. And again, there's no such thing as a no-carb. So really look at your horse, what he's doing, what problems he might have, and is it really necessary? There are really no magic pills or magic supplements that are going to correct or cure all problems in horses, but there are some supplements that might be necessary if the diet might not be balanced. And because you would be the one getting the supplement, please just be an educated buyer and really read the labels before purchasing your products. Forage has a very high supply of omega-3 fatty acids, so the horses on good quality pasture or forage already have a good ratio, and therefore the conundrum of feeding high 6 versus high 3 fatty acids might not be as much of an issue. Holistic supplements, they really need to be purchased with caution because there's very little research done. And whole grain or unprocessed diets are okay, but might require the advice of a nutritionist to help balance the rest of the vitamins or minerals in the diet. And that in human nutrition, there are a lot of concerns about eating GMO products, but there really hasn't been a whole lot of research that this has been done in horses and whether or not this should be a concern. So that, I just want to wrap up everything. I'll turn it back over and I'll see if we have any questions. These are my 2 girls that are not on any GMO, unprocessed, holistic, low-starch diets. All right, thank you very much.
So Terry and you guys that aren't here, just unmute yourselves if you've got some questions for Carrie, and the guys here, throw them out if you got some things to ask about or talk to her about.
Yeah, Kathy, you might just have to repeat the question because I might not be able to hear him from the audience.
Okay.
She said that feeding a high starch diet causes them to be hyper for a period of time. If you feed 2 to 3 pounds of a high starch diet, how long does that last? Does that go up for 2 or 3 hours and come down? Or is that 6 hours or is that 24 hours?
That's a really good question. So if you're feeding, 2 to 3 pounds of grain, their glucose and insulin will go up. It usually spikes about 60 to 90 minutes after they eat the meal, and then it'll go back down. So you're only talking, maybe, an hour to 2 hours worth of high glucose, high insulin, and that's when you're going to find their hyperactivity. So you can kind of picture it like a kid on a sugar high. They eat all their Halloween candy, they run around the house for an hour, and then they crash. So that's kind of the same thing that it does in the horse as well.
Does feeding alfalfa make them sweat more or make them hyper?
Was that with alfalfa? Is that what you were asking?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, sorry, I missed the first part of that. Alfalfa does not, actually. Alfalfa, the main ingredient in alfalfa is it's really high in protein. It can be between almost 20 and 30% protein. And protein is actually not used for energy. 10%, maybe 10% of the total energy in the diet comes from protein. So it does not have any link to any of the hyperactivity at all. In terms of excess sweating, I actually haven't seen that done. That is a good question because there is a lot of protein in the sweat. I actually haven't seen that connection. But it can make them urinate more because high levels of protein a lot of the protein needs to be excreted as urea, and that all goes through the kidneys. So if they are on really high levels of protein, regardless of whether it's alfalfa or soybean meal or whatever, it could cause higher levels of urination, and they might be more thirsty. So because they're urinating more, they're drinking more. So that might be the connection there. Yeah, I think that was all of your question. If I didn't answer it all, let me know.
What about feeding distillers grains from ethanol plants?
He was asking what about feeding distillers grains from the ethanol plants. We have a lot of that here.
Yeah, and you know that isn't done a whole lot on the East Coast, but there has been a lot of research done on distillers grains for horses, and it is a very good, viable feed source. It can have good, high quality protein levels in it. I would always recommend, however, before feeding it, that you get it tested to see the full nutrient content before, because I know there's so many different types of the distillers grains and the different plants. Everything comes out just slightly different. So I would recommend getting it tested before incorporating it into the diet. But I've seen, it almost replacing like a full grain ration. So, 2, 3, 4 pounds a day of the distillers grains.
Kathy, we have a question.
Have at it.
What is missing in the diet when horses, and these are not young horses, start eating their manure?
Can someone repeat that so I can hear it?
Yeah, it was really faint.
I'm sorry.
There you go.
She asked, what happens, and these are not, you said these are older horses? Older horses, what is missing in a horse's diet and ration when the older horses start eating their own manure?
Manure. Okay, yeah, coprophagy. Sometimes nothing, and I'm going to start off with that because sometimes it's just a learned behavior, or sometimes it's just, I don't want to say a fad, but I've seen a lot of horses that have been on very good diets for long periods of time, and then they go through a few weeks of eating manure, and then they go back to whatever they were doing. However, I will say sometimes there could be a mineral imbalance, and it might not be that they're missing something, it might just be that something is amiss or something is just imbalanced in the horses. So what I would say, because it is very case specific, I can't just make a blanket statement and say, yes, your horse is missing iron or whatever, would be to work with a nutritionist. And, I could provide, in the chat box, my contact information if you want to send me your horse's diet, and I can look and see if there's anything obvious that might be missing, and I can make a recommendation for, maybe a mineral supplement that might just help balance things out a little bit. But really, it's very horse specific.
Does that answer your question? Do they do it right? Kay, do they do it regularly, or is it hit and miss like she asked?
This is perhaps a regional problem.
Sorry.
My horses,
Just a second. Keep going.
my horses that are older horses, all of them, have started doing it. I have a neighbor that someone wants to turn in for her horses being malnourished because they're doing it. And I talked to a friend who lives just over the border in South Dakota, and her horses are doing it. So I suppose it's possible that the hay from the region is not up to snuff, but...
Yeah, I heard a bit of that, is that a lot of horses in the region are starting to do it, and my first thought would be the hay. I might consider sending it in for some testing to see. It sounds like the mineral levels in the hay just might be a little bit too low, so they are craving some higher levels of minerals. So that would be my first thought, especially if multiple horses in the region are doing it.
I'll be sure to give them a hay testing kit before they go home.
That's a great idea. Thank you.
I also have a PPID horse that I read someplace should be on some sort of a commercial feed. What I'm giving him is hay and just a cup and a half of plain oats to mix his Presend in. Mm-hmm. I do have to disguise the Presend with a teaspoonful of molasses. Any thoughts on, would he be better with a different type of supplemental feed or just continue?
Yeah, I think I heard that as well about a PPID horse needing more than just forage and a little bit of an oats to the diet. And I would say it depends. I don't know what he looks like. If he's got good weight on him, I would say you're probably okay and there'd be no need for anything additional, but also it would depend on the hay quality. So, if it is the same hay that could potentially be making issues with the vitamin and mineral content, then we might have some issues in the diet just being low in some of the minerals. But if they're on a really good quality hay and their weight is fine, I don't see any need to have an addition of a commercial feed. So.
Okay.
Is there anything else for me?
I have one quick question. We were always taught that loose salt is better than block salt for horses because horses' tongues are not rough to consume enough block salt. Is that true?
I think that depends as well, because I've actually seen some horses consume an entire 50-pound block in about 3 days. So they're doing it somehow. Some horses don't like to lick. Just in general, they don't like to lick anything. I know my horse is one of them. I can't get her to lick on anything. So therefore, yeah, I think loose salt would be better. But other horses, they seem, they'll go over to a salt block, they'll lick on it for 5 or 10 minutes, and then they'll be fine. So really, salt is it's the only minerals that really horses will consume to regulate themselves. They regulate their salt intake. Granted, like I said, some that consume 50 pounds in 3 days might not be regulating. They might just have a craving. But for the most part, they will regulate. But if you do have horses that won't lick, or just, you put a salt block out there and it doesn't disappear at all, then you might want to do the loose salt. But, here at Rutgers, we do the blocks, and, all of our horses, we've seen look on them from time to time, and they seem to be doing fine.
Thank you.
Good questions. Anything else?
Anything else from you guys? Okay, I think we've about kind of have Carrie wrapped up, and I really do.
One second, Kathy. Now,
Okay.
Are you talking a loose mineral, horse mineral that you mix? Is that what you're asking?
Straight white salt. I don't ever like to combine other minerals in there, because those can get thrown off in terms of, too high, too low, deficient, toxic, etc. White salt you can't. So just do sodium chloride. Don't mix in anything else.
Does that answer? Is there a mineral salt? A mineral salt block? Is that what you've been seeing?
There is the brown salt, or the red salt block, some call it, but it's a multi salt block. I don't like those either. I like just the plain white salt, just because, on one hand, if the horse is one of those that consumes the block faster than others, they're getting way more of other minerals than they really need. But if your horse is one of the horses that doesn't consume enough or consumes very little, the levels are so low in the block that they're negligible anyway. So I just think, because other minerals have too much possibility of having everything get thrown off in the system, that you should just do the white salt. And I'm actually putting on chat right now my email, so if anybody has any further questions, they can just go onto the chat, and they can go ahead and email me.
Oh, Monty's got one more quick one.
Okay.
If you're feeding alfalfa hay, your calcium to phosphorus ratio is way off. If you don't want to feed mineral, how do you balance that ration?
So actually, high levels of calcium isn't really detrimental. It's not really an issue. They're about 6 to 1 roughly in the alfalfa to calcium to phosphorus ratio. 2 to 1 is ideal. You never want to go higher with the phosphorus than you do calcium. You always want calcium to be higher. And even if you're on a full, solid alfalfa diet, the calcium is, 6 to 1. That's okay. Calcium has a really large range that is it is acceptable at, and when it is that high, it is okay. Granted, if they're on a 6-to-1 calcium to phosphorus ratio for 30 years of their life, there is some issues it could cause. You know, there is some, you know, possible enteroliths or intestinal stones that could potentially be a problem, but that's like really, really long-term ingestion of high calcium.
Anything else? Okay, I think we'll pull Carrie to a close and really appreciate it.
Okay.
And thank you so much, Carrie, because that was just spot on, and you're so good at all your nutrition stuff. It's just so awesome.
Well, thank you, everybody, and sorry about the little technical difficulty at the beginning, but have a good rest of your meeting and have a great day.
We made it work. You're quite adaptable. Okay.